I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anybody that I recommend this game. I'm big into the Resident Evil games, and Resident Evil 4 Remake is the best kind of remake. What do I mean by this? Well, The Last of Us 1 ended up getting a remake, and that was kind of a visual overhaul, but the mechanics of the game felt dated as heck. But the Resident Evil 4 Remake is built from the ground up for Resident Evil fans. What I appreciate most about the RE remakes is the fact that Capcom acknowledges the fact that the old games already exist. So they're not trying to just do the same thing again. They're kind of like a spiritual recreation. So at its core, RE4 is a linear adventure with big open maps that you can end up exploring. We're not talking about like a big open world map or anything. These are kind of sectioned off small zones that have a lot of intricacies and details. I really enjoy the formula that they have with this game, where you basically go into an area, kill everything, and then start exploring for all of the loot and treasure. And whereas most other games you might get bored with this game loop, the treasure that you find will directly end up impacting you during the next fight, because you might be able to afford a better weapon. Speaking of the weapons, there sure are a lot of them, and they sure do like to clog up your inventory. My recommendation for someone who hasn't played an RE game before is that you want to be very careful and meticulous with the items that you do decide to keep. A good rule of thumb is investing in the starting weapons, because once you end up unlocking all of the perks on a weapon, you'll be able to get one final upgrade, which is usually game changing. Either just increasing the damage outright or allowing you to have your bullets pierce through multiple enemies. What I especially appreciate about this game is how open and transparent it is with the player. Oftentimes you'll question whether or not you should try to buy a new gun, but in RE4, they very much encourage you selling your existing weapons regardless of the upgrades you put in them, because you'll get most of your money back. So moving on from the weapons, let's talk about the general balance of the game. Woo! This game can be very, very hard. So let me start by saying that I didn't know for the longest time that when you select a different suitcase, which is basically your inventory, I thought it was just selecting a vanity skin for your inventory. Turns out I was wrong. Turns out that these actually have functional perks that will passively affect your gameplay. The gray suitcase, for example, will end up giving you more pistol ammo drops from enemies. And the entire game, I had the gold suitcase, which gave me increased money. Having higher money was definitely a good investment, if you'll excuse the awkward pun, because it allowed me to upgrade a lot of my weapons and gave me a lot more freedom with the weapons that I wanted to choose. However, I found myself almost always on the verge of being completely out of ammo. It's funny to think that the game would have been a lot easier if I wasn't so greedy, but I love the fact that the game was as difficult as it was for me. So if you're playing through the game and you find that you're getting an overabundance of ammo, switch to the gold case or something else. The graphics in this game are stupendous, as you would expect. Capcom knocked it out of the park. There's all sorts of crazy little intricate details. It felt like they really had a good time making this game. Beyond the graphics, there's just so many small little touches to the environment. Like one that I feel I can tell you guys without spoiling too many of them is that at the beginning of the game, you're basically thrown into a wave defense scenario where you're fighting a bunch of enemies and stuff, right? Essentially, you have to either defeat enough enemies or survive long enough that the bell tolls and everybody goes off to bingo. But when you're playing New Game Plus, you'll actually keep all of your guns from your previous playthrough, so you can actually use the sniper to shoot the bell of the church in the background to skip the entire conflict entirely. There are so many little details like this that have littered the game that really encourage you playing through the game multiple times that I just really, really appreciate. Now, as far as this game being a remake is concerned, it does mean that the spirit of the original game is still here. The adventure and all of the characters kind of still play out the exact same way. But there's a lot of things that have been slightly tweaked or completely redone, like the Salazar boss fight. And as a fan of the original game, I was really excited to see just how many things that they ended up taking liberties to change and make better. There's a certain air of confidence that Capcom had going into this game. But let's also talk about the story. It's pretty good, even if a bit disjointed and weird. There's something about the simplicity of RE2 that I still just prefer that game more in terms of the overarching story. It's a lot simpler to just be dealing with zombies than it is with the Los Plagos. But essentially, The characters of this island ended up digging too greedily and too deeply, like the dwarves in the mines of Moria and Lord of the Rings, but instead of finding a Balrog, they ended up finding a bunch of weird bugs. The bugs end up giving them powers, but at a cost of them becoming mutant freaks and also becoming kind of part of a hive mind. But essentially, your main character is Leon, and you're thrown into this wild adventure to try and save Ashley. She is, no joke, the president's daughter that the bad guys, I'm sure, have kidnapped so that they can infect her with the bug and control the entire world. It's as ridiculous as it is awesome. And while the game never necessarily breaks the serious tone of this plot, there are some moments where you can tell it's being ridiculous on purpose. Like, this game knows exactly what it is. And a lot of that is owed to the original game. Sound quality is great, replayability is awesome with New Game Plus, and many incentives to replay through the game multiple times. But let's talk about the stuff that I struggled with. So the main gameplay aspect of this game is going to be exploration and combat, with combat being at the forefront. I went into this game playing it like classic Resident Evil games, but there's actually a lot of complexity to the combat. There are so many different things that you have to balance in this remake that is overwhelming, and honestly, I only started getting the hang of halfway through the game. Basically, you have a knife and you can parry enemy attacks so long as you see this little prompt in the bottom right. But sometimes there will be attacks that you can't parry and you have to press E really quickly, or whatever it would be on controller, to dodge the attack instead. Half the time I, again, was just playing this like the classic games, where I would just try to turn around and run as quickly as possible, only to find that I would get hooked or grabbed by enemy attacks. On top of all of this, where you shoot an enemy matters. Headshots is just going to deal more damage, but generally shooting legs is probably going to be your best option because it'll allow you to do a melee attack to incapacitate the enemy, which gives you some much needed breathing room. Combat areas feel very intentionally hectic with specific enemy placements and setups. It's almost like the battles themselves are a puzzle that you have to solve, all the while being very meticulous and careful which guns you end up using because you need to save your ammo for tougher confrontations later. So this might be a bit of a surprise because I've never really done something like this before, but with my original review of RE4 Remake, I actually gave it a perfect score, a 5 out of 5 masterclass. The thing is, I'm in a very particular circumstance where I am literally leaving on a 2-week vacation tomorrow, and so I kind of rushed out this video and just said what I thought was expected of me. So while I'm going to leave most of the review video unchanged, I am going to end up adding this section at the end of it and re-uploading it. Because even though I ended up having a good time with this game, I don't think that it's perfect. Even when I think about my enjoyment of this game, it just kind of felt like oddly generic. I know that that might sound strange, but Resident Evil has been hitting it so hard lately, and even though I loved the Resident Evil 2 remake, a lot of the reason why I enjoyed it so much was they took this old jank game and inserted a lot of what made Resident Evil 4 unique. And the irony with the RE4 remake is that they kind of took away a lot of the charm of the game. The funny thing is that the more I sit with it, the more I'm realizing the amount of content that they ended up cutting from the game. Like, as much as I still hated Ashley in the remake, at least it felt like she had a bit more to contribute to Leon and Ashley's relationship in the original. There was this weird love interest between the two that they implied in the remake, but it didn't really make any sense considering that they had zero chemistry. But more so than any of that, I just think that even though the combat was cool, that they had the whole parry system and everything, ultimately it felt a lot more clunky. Like, periodically when I would play the game, it felt like Leon was deliberately a lot more cumbersome, which didn't really fit with how fast some of the enemy attacks were. And so it seemed like their solution to counterpoint Leon's slower and more clunky controls was to give him the parry system with the knives. But now that I'm going through the game on New Game Plus, I'm realizing how biased my opinion was originally. Now that the excitement has kind of dissipated, I'm here to ask the hard questions of, okay, they added this knife parry system, but is it fun? And in my opinion, it's not. Just mashing the space button last minute when an enemy attacks doesn't really add much to the gameplay variety. It kind of takes away a lot of the tension of enemies getting up close and personal with you. The knife is just the example I'm giving, but the more I play this game, the more I'm realizing there's a lot of subtle changes with how the combat is that kind of just feels really generic and safe. I hope that makes sense. And so I wanted to change my score of 5 out of 5 to 3 out of 5, because even though this game is above average, it felt very forgettable. Like, I definitely have much fonder memories of playing through the RE2 remake, or even more recently Resident Evil Village. But this just kind of felt like more of the same, you know? Like, this is a high quality game without a doubt. But I was getting a little bit blindsided by the fact that, oh, Capcom AAA company, they can do no wrong, 5 out of 5, right? Rather than sharing my own opinions of it. I'm not gonna say that I'm disappointed with the remake, it just didn't hit as hard as I was expecting it to.